here today to continue the AIME Oral History series. My name is Barbara Arnold, Professor of Practice in Mining Engineering at the Pennsylvania State University. Today it is my pleasure to interview Raja Ramani, Emeritus Professor of Mining and Geoenvironmental Engineering and Emeritus George H. and A.B. Dyke Chair in Mining Engineering at Penn State. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dr. Ramani since I studied for my Bachelor of Science degree at Penn State, now some 40 years ago. I can report that I got an A in his ventilation class, so I suspect that makes me worthy of this great honor. I also had the honor of introducing him as inductee 257 in the National Mining Hall of Fame in Denver last October. So let's begin. Dr. Ramani, we've had several discussions over the past months about your career in academia, both education as research, as well as your professional affiliations. But I'd like to begin our interview by asking you about your youth and your path to your career in mining. So why mining, why Penn State, and what motivated you?
Thank you, Bob, for this very nice introduction. Time does fly. I do remember the time when you came to Penn State in the early 80s. I thank AIME for inviting me to be a part of the oral history series. I'm honored to be invited and share my thoughts of my career and views of mining, education, mining industry, and in general on several mining topics. Well, you asked me why mining, why Penn State, and about my early youth. Let me tell you, as opposed to many mining students, people in mining career, which is usually a family tradition, both my grandparents were not miners. They were in fact landlords with extensive land holdings, and they were from southern part of India. But my father decided to go to school and earn a bachelor's degree in economics in 1928. He was the first in the family to go to college. My mother did not complete high school, rather married early, and as usual, tradition was responsible for raising the family. I had a brother who was 7 years older than me and a sister who was 4 years younger than me, and we grew up in Calcutta. My father was an accountant by profession and was the chief accounts officer of a large private firm in Calcutta. I had one uncle who was the chief personal officer of a copper mining company in India, and as a child, I used to visit my uncle and aunt quite often. What impressed me during these visits was looking at material being transported over an aerial tramway or aerial ropeway 15 miles across a hilly terrain and across a river to a milling and smelting plant, and copper coming out from rocks. One end was the mine, at the other end there was the metal. In between, I was looking at minerals, rocks, and this fascinated me. And in fact, it was a fascination of rocks and minerals that led me to start mining as my career.
So you've been at Penn State for almost 60 years, and you certainly bleed blue and white like I do. I know that you've contributed greatly to the education of undergraduate and graduate students through courses on mine ventilation and mineral engineering management, to name a few, and by conducting professional engineering licensure review courses for decades. What did you find the most fulfilling?
Well, the interesting thing about my mining career was that I entered Indian School of Mines in 1958 as an undergraduate student. Indian School of Mines was structured by the British in lines of the Royal School of Mines and opened in 1926 to develop mining engineers in India for the Indian coal mining industry. Basically, it was an academy for mining with the objective of developing mine managers for Indian mining industry, particularly the emphasis in coal mining and underground coal mining. I graduated in 1962 with a bachelor's degree. I was second in a class of 90 students. But the mining career in India is really based upon obtaining 2 certificates of competency to manage mines. And these were government issued certificates that you have to pass exams, very much like the PE exam. The second class manager's certificate I obtained in 1963. The first class manager's exam I cleared in 1964 and continued to work in the same company where I started as a minor trainee in 1962. By the time I decided for higher studies, I had a feel for higher studies from 4 different sources. While I was growing up in school, a couple of my senior students had left for higher studies. A couple of my professors were from England, and they talked about schools in England. My own feeling was, as I started work in India, that I needed to know more about the theory of mining. I knew a lot about the practice of mining. And finally, there were a couple of major disasters. About 600 miners were killed in 2 explosions, one in 1958 and one in 1965. I realized that safety was extremely important, particularly ventilation and explosion control. And this motivated me to graduate school. Well, my own experience was students from School of Mines have gone to England and Australia. Very few had come to US. And in 1965, I applied to Cordo School of Mines because the name Cordo School of Mines, Royal School of Mines, Indian School of Mines, we were all schools. I wrote to the head of the department saying I want to do ventilation, explosions, study, wanted to do underground coal mining, wanted to study safety. Very fortunate that the professor wrote back to me saying, you should be applying to West Virginia and Pennsylvania rather than Cordo School of Mines. And I wrote to Penn State, and Bob Stefanko, who was head of the department at the time, wrote back to me, and that was the reason why I came to Penn State in 1966. After about 4 years in mining industry, the last job I had, I was manager of a large underground coal mine. There were 30 engineers reporting to me, and 2,000 miners were working in the mine. It was a large mine producing 1 ton per worker per day. Very small compared to US, but one of the largest mines. So I was a mature graduate student when I appeared in Penn State. The Penn State career, which I'm very happy to say, is still continuing, and it is about 50 years, 55 years since I came to Penn State as a graduate student, and quote unquote retired in 2001, almost 20 years ago. But Penn State experience is absolutely fabulous. From 66 to 70, I was a graduate student. 70 to 78, I was a young junior faculty member. 78, I got promoted to professor. 1987 to 1998, I was head of the Department of Mineral Engineering, which had 5 different academic programs and pretty close to 15 academic degrees, bachelor's, master's, PhDs. In 1998, I was appointed to the first chair in the college as the inaugural appointee. And as I told you, I retired in 2001, but continued to be active. Well, let's talk about Penn State in 1966. It was a very small program. There were 25 undergraduate students and an equal number of graduate students. The graduate students were from, majority of the graduate students, about 75%, were from 4 countries: India, China, Iran, and several South American countries. The remaining 25% of the students were Americans. That's about 6 or 7. And in fact, when I joined the department and went to graduate school to pick up my admission papers, the dean of the graduate school called me in and said, "Tell Bob Stefanko that he should start the mining graduate program in India and admit Americans as foreign students. That would be better." Well, let me tell you, the faculty was one of the best. Stefanko, Manula, Hardy, Kochanowski, and Howard Hartman. The program had 4 areas of emphasis: rock mechanics, systems engineering, ventilation, and mining methods. The graduate students were outstanding. Several of the graduate students went on to become faculty in the United States. The undergraduate students were absolutely marvelous. Many of them became presidents and vice presidents of mining companies. And I was so happy to be back in academia. It was wonderful. I had great 4 years. I started my master's program with Chuck Manula in systems engineering. Well, I once again felt I was in kindergarten learning ABC. Computers were new, systems engineering was new, rock mechanics was new to me. Though I was a mature graduate student, I felt I was back in kindergarten learning mathematical modeling, computer simulation, and all that. More importantly, I learned a lot about American mining systems. amazed at the ventilation systems, the production systems, the large machinery, the work ethics. Well, I had two heads of the departments. Bob Stefanko was my head from 66 to 69, and Tom Falkie became head of the department in 1969 and started talking to me about, Raj, if you are interested, we are looking for a young faculty member to join the faculty. And therefore, in 1970, I was still thinking about whether I want to go to work in industry or go back to India or continue. But I really enjoyed my discussions with fellow graduate students, really enjoyed the visits to the mines, the productive atmosphere. One of the most interesting meetings at the time I had was with Dr. Frank Appel. When I talk about mature graduate student, Frank Appel was coming back to teach to Penn State after spending 20 years in industry as leader of research. And he was looking for help in selecting graduate students for his mineral processing program. And Bob Stefanko told me, Ramani, go and help Dr. Appel with his applicants. And that convinced me that being in industry was good, but getting back to academia is probably much more worthwhile. And Frank was motivating to me to come back to stay in academia. Fortunately, Stefanko assigned me to teach mine ventilation, which was a passion of mine. And then Falkie came in and asked me to teach systems engineering, which was a second passion of mine. Ventilation was something that I had done work in underground coal mines in India, on which I had done some research. Systems engineering was something I had learned from the ground fundamentals in the US, teaching these two courses with students, undergraduate students, helping fellow graduate students. I thought academia was my future and decided to stay at Penn State. You asked me about my career in Penn State. Falkie brought a new dimension to Penn State. You know, Falkie was the first systems engineering PhD in the country. He got his PhD from Penn State in 1961, worked for a few years as systems engineer for International Minerals and Chemicals in Chicago, and then worked for about a number of years in the phosphate mines in Florida. And while he was in Florida, he started teaching courses on mine investment and cost analysis. Yet another area where I became a kindergarten student for Dr. Falkie. I learned a lot about mine investment analysis, cost estimation, and cost management. And when he left Penn State in 1973 to become director of Bureau of Mines, I took the responsibility to teach the courses on mine investment and mine cost analysis. And fortunately for Penn State, Tom Falkie was replaced by Bob Frantz as another head of the department. Bob Frantz came with extensive background in international and national consulting, an expert in management, mine exploration, mine development, and international consulting. And I learned a lot from him about teamwork, team spirit. For me personally, as I told you, the 1970 to 78 period, the junior faculty period, was one of intense growth, learning things from very, very senior people. Bob Stefanko, Tom Falkie, Bob Frantz. I learned a lot about teaching, research, graduate student direction, continuing education, involvement in professional societies, and other organizations. I was promoted to associate professor in 1974, appointed chairman of the Mineral Engineering Management section in 1974, tenured in 1976, promoted to professor in 1978. I started teaching several new graduate and undergraduate courses, did extensive research on systems engineering, particularly ventilation, production engineering, dust, diesel, longwall mining, land use planning. I am particularly proud that in 1974, I looked at land reclamation and surface mine reclamation as an area that is likely to grow into great importance. But reclamation of lands have been practiced in the United States for about 40 years, and still there were questions. And a couple of things that motivated me to look at the surface mine land reclamation from a different perspective, from the perspective of land use planning rather than surface mine land reclamation, was my first venture into looking at mining more as a land use rather than as an industry. Mining has been an industry from the time human beings were evolving, because the products of mining and products of agriculture sustain economy, and still people do not have an appreciation for mining. They still carry around banners, ban mining, and I felt that mining, while promoted as an industry, was really use of the land and not an ultimate use, only an intermediate use. And that led me to the next 20 years looking at land use planning and sustainable development of mining practices as one of my future goals. Fortunately, I had a project from EPA in 1974, in which I was able to bring together the geography department at Penn State, the mineral economics department at Penn State, the geology department at Penn State, and the mining engineering department. The mining engineering department from mining point of view, the geology department from groundwater resources, the mineral economics department from economics of land use planning and cost analysis, and the geography department from a larger perspective of land forms and land use. This was my first large interdisciplinary venture into research, which really had a big impact in my future research projects after 1980. You really have to look at my career as it continuously evolves. Started as a mining engineer, interested very much in underground, but underground coal mining, gradually expanded into surface mining where I had little or no experience, but started in equipment selection, went into reclamation, and finally into land use planning, environmental planning, and gradually into ecological planning. Well, 1980 to 2000 was the time I became a senior faculty member at Penn State. 81 was a very sad year. My mentor, Chuck Manula, passed away in 6 weeks from being diagnosed with cancer to his death. It was 6 weeks. 6 months later, Stefanko passed away. He had a bad kidney. He lost one kidney in an accident in 1948, and the other kidney started failing. Stefanko and Manula were like my dad and my brother. And when they both passed away, all of a sudden, I became the senior faculty in the department. And Bob Frantz started increasingly relying on me to take the load of these two faculty members. Stefanko, I fondly remember. I will remember every time I think of SME, I think of Stefanko. Walking into his office in fall of 1966, he gave me the application to SME AIME student application form. And that was the time I became a student member of SME. In 1970, he was becoming chairman of coal division and asked me to become a part of a unit committee in coal division. He became president of SME in 1978 and had me moved up to vice chairman of coal division. And Bob Frantz was another stalwart who ensured that the service to SME continued. Manula also did the same thing. He started me in SME in Operations Research Unit Committee, which was the Systems Engineering Committee. Falkie asked me to take a lead in AppCom Symposium series, which was just a budding symposium for computers in mining. Hartman was starting a mine ventilation symposium series, and Hartman asked me, Raj, would you join me with Hans? So I look at these people and look at that professionalism and the commitment to what societies can do, technical societies and professional societies can do, and how an education institution can link up with these professional societies. I admire these people. Well, so every time I think of Stefanko, Falkie, when you think of me as a SME Legion of Honor member, I guess, I would not have been a Legion of Honor member if I didn't have that student application pushed in 1966 by Bob Stefanko.
Well, so Dr. Ramani, some of the things that I'm now starting to get into on respirable dust with my research was really building on the Center for Respirable Dust that you led back in the 1980s and 90s. Can you tell me more about your experiences with that center and others at Penn State?
Bob, that's a very interesting question. After I worked on that surface mine reclamation project with funding from EPA, I always felt that we have to have large interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary projects that will produce more interaction among people interested in common ideas, make progress much more faster in some areas which are quite interrelated. And the 1980s afforded good opportunity for such ideas. The first to come through was the Standard Oil of Ohio. This company decided that they were spending about $40 million on research every year and not getting a big bang for the buck. And therefore, they advertised in all national newspapers around 1981 or 82 timeframe that they would like to support 5 ideas for research at any university over a period of 5 years at $500,000 a year. And that was big money at that time on energy-related projects. And this advertisement was a full-page ad in New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all major newspapers. I came back to department that afternoon and told Bob Frantz that I'm going to write a proposal on mine systems research. We batted around ideas. Fortunately, over the next 1 year, Standard Oil got pretty close to 1,000 5-page prospectus for their invitation. They narrowed it down to 37 full-page proposals, from which they selected 5 for funding. And the Penn State proposal on mine systems research was one of the 5 that they had selected. And we started research on Standard Oil Center for underground longwall mining. Around the same time, the US Congress decided that some of the mining problems are so generic that they should establish centers of excellence on these areas of research. And one of the centers they identified was Center for Respirable Dust Control. And again, Penn State was able to join hands with West Virginia and write a proposal, and this center came along. And the third center that came along was National Mineland Research Center. Again, Barbara, if you remember, National Mineland Reclamation was a raging problem. The Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act was passed in 1977, and I had already worked on land use planning, and therefore, when Office of Surface Mining decided that they will support this National Mineland Research Center addressing not only reclamation, but water pollution, revegetation, land use planning, and many other areas. So this idea of a center with a lot of areas addressed by different faculty, but in a coordinated manner. We had 3 centers, and I was fortunate to be co-director of all the three centers. Let me give you, to answer your specific question, the Respirable Dust Research Center. Look at respirable dust problem. It's what I call as a very complex health hazard problem in underground mining. We have known that respirable dust is a health hazard ever since we started mining. The Neolithic man who was mining stone for making spears suffered from silicosis. That was 2,500 years ago. We knew that silica was hazardous. We have been trying to control it, but not very effectively. Even to this day, we have the problem. So the question is, it is not strictly an engineering problem. It is not strictly a basic science problem. It is not strictly a medical problem. Finally, because people have to work in such environments, it is also a social problem, a management problem. If you are not looking around, unsafe practices may creep in. Doesn't matter whose fault it is, an unsafe practice is an unsafe practice. And therefore, to tackle this problem, we need all approaches. Mining engineers have to work at reducing the dust problem in mines. Mineral processors, chemists, physicists have to look at it from a control point of view, but the control is not engineering control, but the toxicity control. But to control the toxicity, you have to characterize the dust. Finally, the doctors have to look at and see, is there any medication that can be given that will prevent the damage to the lungs or arrest it? And finally, we have to look at how can we train the workers better? How can we provide them with better tools and techniques to avoid breathing dust? So you can see that when we put together the team, we had the medical centers at Penn State and West Virginia, the mining programs at Penn State and West Virginia, the mineral processing section, the physics, chemistry departments, the mechanical engineering departments, they are all involved. And we did the next 20 years concentrated research, one project feeding on another. In that, we worked along with the former US Bureau of Mines, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, as well as mining companies. We did underground sampling. We did in-mine experiments. We did large controlled experiments. There were a lot of experiments done in wind tunnels in the University of Minnesota, very famous. Just to give you an example, the expertise at the University of Minnesota, you talk about dust problems in mines. You know, when these spaceships go up for 20 days and 30 days, and human beings are in this confined environment, there's a tremendous amount of dust in those cabins. And these dusts have different characteristics. They have biological origin. And they have to be monitored, measured, controlled, and no place to dispose them of either, except in that environment. And the University of Minnesota was a leader in these kind of studies. and they were involved in underground dust control. Underground dust is not just coal dust or mineral dust. There is diesel dust. There are dust from other sources, blasting dust, blasting fumes. As such, it's a very complex study. And I'm glad that this area of study has continued and we are still solving the problem. But let me say, the dust problem continues to persist. We have made tremendous progress, and we will continue to make progress only if we make this kind of systematic team approach, engineers working with scientists to control the problem. Well, coming back to the Standard Oil Center of Excellence, we attacked the long wall problem from the machine, the nature, and other aspects. In general, the team of investigators and the interaction of these inter and multidisciplinary teams, while very difficult to manage, coordinate, I don't have to tell you, researchers are very strong-minded, strong-willed people with very strong ideas as to why their idea is very important. Managing a team of researchers is more difficult than managing a team of kindergarten kids, but it's very worthwhile. Well, let me continue further with my career in Penn State, as you have asked. Well, as my career in Penn State progressed, my career in SME progressed. I became the coal division chairman in 1980 with my first stint on the board of directors. I was getting exposed to the problems of professional societies as well. Some fundraising activities. The new building in Littleton, Colorado was just completed. And in 1987, I was appointed head of the department after a national search. The most satisfying aspect of research with center funding was the ability to provide continuity to my research. The most satisfying aspect of my becoming head of the department was creating two new undergraduate programs. The Geo-Environmental undergraduate program, which is now, I think, called the Environmental Systems Engineering program, and I had an Industrial Health and Safety program. The reason I felt that these two programs will complement the mining, mineral processing, petroleum engineering program in the department was that a lot of the stuff that we were doing with regard to separating the valuable materials from the other materials in rocks and minerals is very similar to separating the hazardous material from the waste. And some of the things that we were doing in the Dust Center with respect to health research was very relevant to research in mine environmental control, mine systems engineering, industrial health and safety. And therefore, creation of these two new programs, I consider as one of exploitation of what I call as opportunity. But a word of caution here, a word of caution. Some programs should always be considered as parasitic programs. A mine environmental engineering program, a mine reclamation program, or an industrial health and safety program cannot exist in isolation without a mining engineering program. Realize that it is the mining industry. It is an industry that can support these programs. The problems exist because of the industry, and we have to be careful that we do not consider these new programs, which become very popular overnight, as programs that can survive. A parasitic community can survive only as long as the main body survives. If the mining engineering program does not survive, a mine environmental engineering program cannot survive. One other aspect of my career in Penn State educational career was the miner training program. Another program in which I got very interested, Penn State was a leader in miner training. As you know, Pennsylvania has a long history of mining. No wonder Pennsylvania was one of the original 13 colonies. We had a long history of anthracite mining, very long history of bituminous coal mining. We had the second oldest health and safety laws in the United States. The Pennsylvania state government was very progressive and recognized miner training as important. And Penn State, ever since the founding of the mining school, placed emphasis on miner training. And we became a leader in miner training around 1974 when the union contract with Bituminous Coal Miner Association called for miner training, and miner training was a required function of every company according to the federal 1977 Mine Health and Safety Act. And Penn State took the lead in forming a miner training program to train all miners. You were talking about your dad graduating from Elders Ridge Mine Mechanics School, which was a school started by Penn State. They developed a mine on the surface. A room and pillar section was actually developed with a full-scale continuous miner and shuttle cars so that people looking for work can be trained as mine mechanics. This was done by Penn State. And this was done as early as 1974. Fortunately, I was the director of the miner training program from 1992 to 2001. And I cannot emphasize the importance of knowledge, skills, and attitude to safe work habits. And all these three, knowledge, skills, and attitude, they require education and training. Our miner trainers, I thought, had very special skills. So I suggested that they get into research. Not research, very extensive research on, say, like, for which maybe specialized qualification in health and safety training, higher education in health and safety is required. But we do a lot of things in mining which are very unique. For example, the personal protective devices miners use is the device that almost all emergency services use in responding to an emergency. For example, when the World Trade Center accident happened, the two planes crashed in and the center collapsed. Everybody who responded had to use respirators. And there was a project What was done during the emergency? What kind of devices did they use? What were the agencies who responded? I told my minor trainers, why don't we respond to this proposal and write a small proposal? So we decided to do an analysis of the personal protective equipment used by emergency responders at the World Trade Center emergency response. We contacted 54 agencies, got exactly what was provided to them, what training was provided to them, what equipment was provided to them. We did an analysis of it and submitted a research paper. Another one was people working in these stadiums. When they are building the stadium, slipping, tripping, and falling accidents from scaffolding and other places. Mining is a very dangerous place. We have low clearance, slippery floors, steel floors, coal preparation plant, electrocution hazard. We responded to a proposal along those lines. When training of workers in metal, non-metal mines became necessary, when government was looking for developing guidelines, we had our workers respond to it. When you look at the educational program, my feeling is education institutions have to take a much broader look. Training is a very essential component of improving the health and safety of workers. One component of training is developing resources for trainers. Penn State developed, the mining engineering program developed resources for foreman training. I can proudly say my 10 graduate students worked to develop mine foreman training resource material, foreman exams training resource material, and my trainers and my graduate students also developed mine foreman automated exam resource materials for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This we thought was also essential functions of academic programs. Well, in a long, winding answer to your question, I have tried as a teacher at Penn State to educate and train on mining and related topics, to ensure that the students I come into contact with, whether they are undergraduates, graduates, fellow professionals, practicing engineers, or lay persons, people just interested in mining, because we taught a lot of courses called Mining for Non-Mining People, because we felt these non-mining people should know the importance of mining. One of those courses is professional engineering. That you know very well. I want to tell you, my own development there is a very interesting. As I told you, I was a licensed first-class mine manager in India, because I consider that if licensing is important, if that is what is required, we should get it. Professional engineer is a very, very important step for an engineer. I got my own professional license in 1971. Subsequently, I have encouraged all my graduate students, all my students to get professional engineering license. I started teaching a course in 1973 and have continued to this day to teach the course. I'm very pleased that Penn State provided me this opportunity. That's what I consider, that Penn State allowed me to pursue all my interests, allowed me to travel to 35 countries, invested minds in many countries, went underground and spent time with engineers there, learning their techniques, their training programs, their educational programs. So let me say, looking back, Penn State is my home away from home.